For this theory-based case presentation, I chose the article on Rose. For the presenting concerns or problem, this client is in the hospital after a suicide attempt by cutting. She currently appears to be distant and withdrawn with a quiet but polite demeanor. This client expresses negative self-talk, saying things like she is ashamed to all who know her and she does not deserve to live. This client does report that she had a significant traumatic event in her adolescence, and that has essentially led up to this trauma, or I'm sorry, the suicide attempt. 10 years ago, she witnessed her family member's murder and she witnessed and experienced rape. This client reports that she had a new romantic relationship and she experienced some emotions and feelings during this relationship that acted as a trigger for her. So she's currently now ready for discharge from the hospital, and she does express motivation for the future and readiness for change that are very promising for her. And so that's why my agency was called in to see if we can offer her some help. My understanding of this information from the article is that this client likely has an undiagnosed mental health disorder, and it's been triggered by the feelings and experiences she went through in her new romantic relationship. This client has spent years focusing on her work and suppressing her old memories and feelings that she experienced during the traumatic incident in her adolescence. Because this trauma was never addressed, basically her symptoms quickly reached crisis levels, and instead of seeking help, which is looked down upon in her culture, she acted on those thoughts of suicide. This client does have strong ties to her faith, and she does report feeling that God would not let her suffer in vain. So she does express some motivation for the future, and she does seem open to accepting some help. For the biopsychosocial factors, we know that this is a 25-year-old Guatemalan female living in Guatemala. She reports a happy and normal early childhood. She lived with her parents and her younger sister on the family farm, where she attended school and also worked on the farm, so it was a challenging but good childhood. Her trauma does appear to be concentrated on this one major event. We know for her culture factors that seeking help is stigmatized, and this probably limited, her desire to seek help in the past. In terms of her family, she did move in with relatives after her immediate family's deaths, but we're unsure of her current family relationship with this aunt and uncle that she had lived with. For her career or for employment, she did focus greatly on her career and was employed full time in tourism industry. She fostered relationships with indigenous women, purchasing their goods to sell to tourists, and so this was a good source of social support for her. She does report leaning on her faith in the Catholic Church. And in terms of her relationship status right now, we're unsure if she plans to continue with this recent romantic relationship. One mid-level theory that could be applied in this situation is the crisis theory. The gist of this theory is that we all experience a crisis or more in our life, which we must overcome to deal with future crises. After a crisis, we have a reduced level of functioning and increased vulnerability. There is a 7-stage model to implement regarding the crisis theory to help someone overcome that crisis situation. Conduct a thorough assessment, establish rapport, identify major problems and what has led up to the crisis, use active listening to help them explore their emotions, explore their old coping mechanisms and generate new ones, generate and implement an action plan, and create a plan for follow-up to ensure that the action plan is working. To apply this with Rosa, I would spend a good deal of time in the beginning phase focusing on rapport building. The article does mention that she's a bit apprehensive of working with the social worker, and so I think it would be important to really build up that good relationship before jumping into the more challenging parts of this 7-step model. Then we would spend time assisting her with emotional exploration of her feelings surrounding this traumatic incident. She really has suppressed these feelings for 10 years now, so she would have a lot to unpack there and would definitely need to spend a good amount of time in this area as well. Then we would move on to examining her past coping mechanisms, It doesn't seem like she had very many coping mechanisms other than suppression, at least from what the article tells us. So we definitely want to take time to define new ones with her. Then we would put this all into an action plan and make sure we follow up to ensure this plan is actually helping her. Strengths for the crisis theory, it does provide a step-by-step plan so that does not leave any room for guesswork for the client. And it is applicable across cultures, which is important given that my culture and Rosa's culture are different. We want to make sure that we're aware of those differences. For limitations, it may require more in-depth assessment than other methods. This could be a limitation for Rosa because we already know that she's maybe a bit distrusting of social workers and helping agencies just because of, her culture and the way she grew up. So it might be hard to really get in depth with her in these assessments. A second theory that would be applicable here is going to be cognitive and behavioral theories. The gist of this is going to be that your thoughts influence your emotions and behaviors, and your behaviors influence your emotions and thoughts. These are two well-established theories, and they've been combined to create a well-known treatment method called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. The goal of CBT is to identify those maladaptive thoughts or coping skills or behaviors and change them. And essentially, changing one of those thoughts or one of those behaviors or coping skills initiates that positive cycle of change. So, if we can change this negative thought, it will in turn change her behavior. That change in her behavior will come back and change her thoughts. And so that cycle can continue and create a lot of positive change for the client. Applying this to Rosa, it would be beneficial for Rosa because it does create lasting change. So it's essentially takes about 12 to 20 weeks to go through CBT. And in the beginning, you're going to explore thoughts, emotions, and behaviors and make sure that it is appropriate for your client. Then through the next sessions, you're going to implement a variety of CBT techniques. So you're going to go through things like cognitive restructuring and reframing, which is essentially reframing negative thought patterns. You can also use things like journaling and relaxation techniques, successive approximation, which is breaking down overwhelming tasks or feelings into smaller pieces, and even exposure therapy. Of course, with this as well, you're going to want to follow up to maintain that stability. Strengths for cognitive and behavioral theories. It is evidence-based. There's a lot of proof that it works, which is always a really good, solid, starting point with treatment for a client. It also does prepare your client for long-term success. I think this is important for Rosa because she has all that motivation for her future, but also because of the limited helping agencies in her area. So, if we can be successful with this implementation of CBT, it hopefully sets her up for that long term success. For limitations, it does not focus on external systems. It's really focusing on those internal thoughts and emotions and personal behaviors. So it doesn't look at other strengths she may have, like her career, her faith, or potentially her family. Additionally, it does have some concerns for ethical implications. So, some people will say that as social workers, we should not be attempting to change thoughts and change behaviors. So, that could be an ethical concern there. So, my choice between these two options for Rose would be the cognitive and behavioral theories. I would choose this because she is expressing a strong desire to change and motivation for her future. So she does seem to be ready to move past her immediate crisis situation. And she has that, motivation based on her career and wanting to help others who may have experienced something similar to her. So it's really important to get her, jumping into that long term change. And there's proven success for the use of CBT with suicidal patients, so this would really be applicable to Rose because it does reduce reattempts for suicide. So that would be important for her to keep her again, healthy and well and out of the hospital. Additional considerations with choosing cognitive and behavioral theories would be the accessibility of resources and services. We already know that her area does not necessarily have treatment centers, so she would have a trouble accessing these resources and services on her own. Um, this could be a challenge because, if my agency does leave this area, we don't know what that follow-up care will look like for her. So we want to be just keeping that in mind and creating some type of plan so that she's able to continue using her skills learned in CBT, well into the future. Additionally, there's considerations for time and commitment. Again, it does take 12 to 20 weeks, so we want to make sure that Rosa is able to commit to that amount of time, and also that I would be able to commit to that amount of time as the social worker. Make sure that my agency is going to be there for an appropriate length of time to implement this and follow up with Rose, and just making sure that she is committed to showing up for these sessions weekly and knowing that it is going to take time and commitment, but the outlook is really positive for her. Additionally, these cultural differences and the stigmatization in her culture. So we know that there is the stigmatization of seeking help, and we want to make sure that she is able to move past that and be able to continue coming to our sessions. And then just keeping in mind that, again, my culture and Rose's culture are different. So we want to make sure that I'm aware of those differences and can apply CBT for her appropriately within her cultural preferences. So these are the references that I found, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen to my